everybody, welcome to your set of mammal video notes. So before we get into things that make mammals mammals, let's first talk about some of the evolutionary origins of mammals. So we've talked about all of the other vertebrates so far, and we've talked about how things have progressed as different types of vertebrates have evolved. Well, mammals are really no different in that they actually come from ancient reptiles or therapsids. So early mammals had these really large eye sockets, which meant they were nocturnal, and they mainly ate insects, so they really didn't compete with dinosaurs. However, they really weren't prevalent until the tertiary period, or what is known as the age of mammals. And this is when mammals really started to diversify and kind of take over the planet. So let's talk about some things that make mammals who they are. So first of all, mammalia in Latin means breast. And this is because they have milk from mammary glands. This is how they feed their young. They're also endothermic, so they maintain their own body temperature. They're usually covered in hair. We'll talk about that more in a minute. Well-developed brains. We are still with a four-chambered heart. So if you remember, only birds have a four-chambered heart. So as we have gotten more evolved, we've also seen more chambers. They have a single lower jawbone and then this really cool structure called a diaphragm, which helps with breathing. So hair, let's talk about hair first, right? So mammal hair is keratinized, so it's made of keratin. However, there's different kinds of hairs that mammals can have. So the pelage, or the coat of hair, has two kinds. So you have those longer guard hairs, which essentially protect the short hairs, and then you have these dense short hairs, which help with insulation. Air also gets trapped in spaces within these hairs, and that's how mammals stay warm, especially in cold temperatures. But, like we said, things do vary. So whales, dolphins, seals, walruses, those are all mammals, but they have very reduced hair structures. And also mammals that live in hot climates really don't have as much hair. But hair is dead cells, so they periodically shed. If any of you have a dog or a cat at home, you know all about this, I'm sure. And the color depends on the pigment that's deposited in the hair shaft. So typically, most mammals have dark hair on top of light hair underneath, but this can vary. So glands are also super important to mammals, and they have four major glands that we're going to talk about. So first is a sebaceous gland, or kind of like an oil gland, and this is associated with hair follicles. So they help lubricate the skin and waterproof the hair, sometimes too much, right? So ladies, all of your dry shampoo, this is to offset your sebaceous glands that you have. Mammals also have sudoriferous glands, and these are the sweat glands. So sometimes we sweat a lot, right? And you can see those down here in this image. They can come up through the skin or near the hair follicle. But this is how we cool ourselves down. In some mammals, not all mammals sweat, right? So if you think about a dog, they pant. That's how they release their heat from their bodies. But the mammals that do have sweat glands use this to cool themselves. There's also scent or musk glands, and these are around the face, the feet, and the anus, and they help secrete pheromones. So if you have a cat, or you've ever been around anyone that has a cat, sometimes, they stick their tail up and they kind of rub their butt on you. They are marking you with their scent, so that's releasing their pheromones. If you've ever had a ferret as a pet, they typically have these glands removed because otherwise they would have a really overpowering musky smell to them. And then lastly, mammary glands. And these are only functional in females, and they help secrete milk for the young. Teeth are also something that we see for the first time that are quite different in mammals compared to previous vertebrates we've talked about. So everything we've talked about thus far has homodont teeth. This time we have heterodont teeth. Remember, hetero meaning different. So they have four different types of teeth, and they're specialized for different functions. Mammals also have something called a soft palate, which is that extension of that secondary palate that reptiles have, and it just completely separates the nasal cavity and the mouth. So your types of teeth, your incisors, right? These are kind of your front teeth, top and bottom, are for biting. Your canines are your corner teeth, those are for tearing. Premolars kind of do a little bit of the canine tearing, but they also do a little bit of what the molar does in terms of grinding. So all of your teeth serve different functions, and you can see down here in this diagram, it's color-coded as well. So in terms of digestion, their digestive tract is very similar to that of other vertebrates, but the structures they have can vary depending on their diet. So specifically herbivores. Herbivores have this enlarged structure called a cecum that is between their small and large intestine, and this helps them digest cellulose, plant matter. They also have an appendix that's actually functionable, unlike ours. And some species, like cows, for example, have a 4-chambered stomach to help them digest cellulose. So you can see the difference in the cecum over here. So the cecum is labeled there. This is in a carnivore. And then look at the massive size of something in an herbivore. And there's also some other digestive behaviors you see in herbivores. So you might hear the term chewing cud, which you see in this giraffe here, or people, it's a lot of times in cows, you'll see it, but they essentially kind of regurgitate some of their plant matter and then they redigest it through their stomach. There's also something called cecal pellets. So you've seen this in the bunnies in the classroom, right? Sometimes they put their heads down and it looks like they're kind of licking their butt. Well, they're actually eating these partially digested pellets and then they redigest them and then they release the brown, Cocoa Puff looking pellets you see in their litter box. So this is because rabbits can't regurgitate, they can't throw up. So they have to actually digest it, poop it out, eat it, redigest it before it's finally released from the body. All right, breathing is also significantly different in mammals because we have something called a diaphragm. So we have these very high metabolic rates, and as a result, we need to have effective gas exchange. So this diaphragm is what helps with that. So when you inspire or inhale, you contract your diaphragm, as you see here, it goes up, okay? Or down, as your lungs go up. So then expiration is when it goes up as your lungs come back in. So if you take a deep breath, you see your chest kind of expands, and then when you release, your chest kind of releases down. And remember, this is different from, say, that body cavity breathing that reptiles have because they don't have this diaphragm structure. In terms of keeping our body temperature, so we have 2 ways of kind of doing that. So we can shiver, which produces a lot of heat without a little movement. And you know, this is kind of involuntary. You really don't have control. Sometimes your teeth start chattering and you're shivering and you're trying to keep yourself warm. But we also have something called non-shivering thermogenesis, which is when your cells are actually using their metabolism to produce heat, and they also are breaking down fat to produce heat. Countercurrent heat exchange also helps with appendages. So your arterial blood is warm and it's going to flow past your venous blood, which is going to your appendages, and it's going to release that warm temperature so that blood's eventually warm as it gets to your arms, your legs, your other parts of your body. Well, environmental extremes, though, can also cause some really different reactions than what most mammals do. So we have 2 things here. We have winter sleep and hibernation. So winter sleep is done by something like this badger here. And they retreat to burrows under the snow. They're less active, but still alert. So if there's like a warm spell in the middle of January, they'll come out and get some food and be seen, but then they can go back and retreat to sleep. Hibernation is a little bit different because it's a period of total inactivity where the metabolism, respiration, and circulation all slow down. And as you know, maybe, hopefully, animals, they eat a lot before they go into hibernation because they lose 1/3 to 1/2 of their body weight while they're hibernating. The nervous system is also very complex of mammals. So mammals, this is the first time we're really seeing that well-developed sense of touch. And they have intricate hands and things like that to work with the things they're touching, like you see in this sea otter here eating an urchin. Vision is still important as well. Olfaction or smelling is important, but not as much so as it used to be or as it is for other animals. And the auditory or your hearing is lessened over time. It is important to note, though, that some species use echolocation to find their prey, which you see in this dolphin here. So they send out these clicks or these sounds, and then they come back after they bounce off something. So the dolphin kind of paints this picture in its mind of where the fish is. Bats also do this. In terms of excretion, so mammals excrete something called urea instead of an ammonia-based, and this is less toxic, and it also does not require a large amount of water, so it helps us maintain that water balance within our bodies. And the kidneys themselves, that's the main organ that's responsible for removing and excreting waste. Pheromones are something that may be kind of new to you, but pheromones have many uses in the animal kingdom, and they kind of serve as nature's perfume. So they help recognize members of the same species, but also recognize members of the opposite sex. And they also help establish and recognize territories. So males especially are going to smell the pheromones of another male when they're trying to have a territory. And it can also induce sexual behavior. And if you're interested in this or you want to look up a little more, there's a lot of stuff out there on humans and pheromones. So quite a few years ago, there were tests done where women were actually in labs smelling the armpits of men to determine whether they were more attracted to a man based on how his armpit smelled or where his pheromones are. And then there's still also today, there's people that actually do something called smell dating, where they smell shirts to determine like who they want to go on a date with. Kind of unique, but hey. So in terms of reproduction, females undergo something called an estrous cycle. And this is when a female is behaviorally and physiologically receptive to the male. So some are monoestrous, meaning one, they have a single yearly cycle once a year, and some are polyestrous, multiple cycles each year. Ladies, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about because we have those lovely monthly periods. That makes us polyestrous. Fertilization then, as a result, when a female is undergoing the estrous cycle, as soon as she copulates with the male, usually that occurs within a few hours. However, some can have delayed fertilization where the female actually stores the sperm until a more favorable environmental time. And then some have immediate fertilization, but the development of the embryo is actually delayed, and this is called embryonic diapause. And it's also important that you understand the word gestation period. So this is the length of time that a young is developing inside of the mother. And this length of time varies immensely depending on the animal. So things like rabbits, different species average about a month, whereas something like an elephant takes about 19 months. Lastly, we're going to get a little bit into the diversity. So there's 3 infraclasses within class Mammalia. So there's Ornithodelphia, which is ancient womb. These are your duck-billed platypus that you see here, and they lay eggs, even though they're a mammal. You have infraclass Metatheria, which means among wild animals, so not quite considered a wild animal in terms of Latin. And these are animals that have pouches, so kangaroos, wallabies, and then here in North America, we have possums. And then lastly, you have infraclass Eutheria. These are your typical wild animals. They're things like bats and deer and whales and rodents and everything you know of as a mammal. So within infraclass Eutheria, there are a lot of different orders, and these are just a few of kind of the more popular ones that we see in our area and that you would know of. So you have Chiroptera, which are bats, Carnivora, tigers, wolves, otters. Artiodactyla are your deer, giraffes, and zebras. They're like your hoofed animals. Cetacea are whales and dolphins. Rodentia are squirrels, beavers, porcupines. And then primates are chimps, orangutans, and humans are also classified here. And then lastly, I just want to touch on an environmental alert with mammals. So harvesting of both live animals and animal parts is a huge problem to members of class Mammalia. So usually they are killed for things like their skins, souvenirs like a tusk or something like that, or a skull. And then as a lot of ancient Asian medicine relies on these animals as well, or sometimes they're harvested live as pets. And this results in their unsustainable wild populations, so they're already endangered, most of these animals, and then they end up going extinct, but it also harms the economy that relies on tourism. So you can help in 2 ways. Make sure when traveling abroad you're a conscious shopper, and wild animals do not make good pets. Even if they were domesticated and you bought it as domesticated, it's still not a good pet to have. And that is it for your notes.